I'm Sammy, I'm with Medtronic, and today we're going to talk about capnography. So moving forward, Christus is going to be using capnography for every intubated patient. So anytime you have a patient on a ventilator, what you should see is one of our filter lines, and you should have a capnography module that should be connected underneath your main monitor, and that'll feed over into your main viewing feed. Let's just talk about why we use capnography. So ultimately, capnography is not just a number, but the whole purpose of it is to try and monitor for respiratory compromised situations. Ultimately, what that means is we're monitoring ventilation. With capnography, the focus is respiratory rate and CO2. That's going to give us our ventilation status. We're using it in conjunction with pulse oximetry, which is giving us our oxygenation status. So if you really think about it, traditionally when we just use a pulse ox, all we have is the heart rate and the SpO2. And then when we have a situation where it may be a respiratory compromised situation, what we do is we add a blood gas to determine what the ventilation status is. The purpose of capnography is that way we can have that information with continuous data points instead of just waiting for the blood gas. When we are monitoring ventilation, there are three main points I always bring up. Again, we are not just looking at a number saying a CO2 should be between 35 and 45. We are actually trying to, as clinicians, assess what is the ventilation status of my patient. So to do so, we consider what the value is based on the illness and the current status of your patient. We look at the waveforms and we look at the respiratory rate. The actual number is going to be varied depending on if my patient has COPD, does my patient have pneumonia, does my patient have a history of COVID, and that's going to adjust what their standard CO2 reading is. So we need to consider that when we're considering a standard value and a variation of that number. Various waveforms will show us what is happening to our patient with the breathing pattern. It'll help us assess very quickly and let us know any deviation of standard breathing while on capnography. And the final thing, like I said, we consider is respiratory rate. If it's low, perhaps they're riding the vent, perhaps they're dropping out that respiratory drive, they're getting tired, or they might be hyperventilating. Next, we'll talk about the waveforms a little more in depthly. So a general waveform should be a square waveform. Your baseline should always be at 0 because when you're breathing in, it should be 0 because you should not have any CO2 in your inspiration. As you begin to exhale, you'll see the square waveform start to rise. At the very end of your exhalation, there'll be an apex point, and that's what my device is measuring. It's measuring the end tidal of that breath, and that's what we're determining what your CO2 value is. As your patient begins to inhale, that number should drop back down to 0, and you should, like I said, you should always have a baseline of 0. So it should be a standard square waveform. However, there's going to be some variations. If you look at your waveform and you see like a shark fin pattern, it could be a bronchospasm, it could mean your patient needs to be suctioned. It just means that that breathing pattern is being obstructed by something. If they are less and less waveforms, you're seeing large seconds go by between breaths. Probably what's happening is your patient's dropping that respiratory rate, you're dropping that drive, and what you'll see is you'll start to see a stair-step pattern going up of CO2 value rising and rising. Just the opposite, if it's a hyperventilation situation, you'll see a lot of waveforms crunched really tight together, and it'll be a stair-step pattern going down. The reason why that is because you're breathing so fast that you're never allowing that CO2 to rise to normal values. Another thing to consider, as I mentioned, there's a waveform on here that's showing as you breathe in, you'll never reach back down to 0. That means you're rebreathing CO2 for some reason. If you do not ever go back to 0 during an inspiration, you need to assess your patient and determine why are we not at 0? What is happening? Why is he rebreathing CO2? Then also we need to utilize capnography during CPR. It's going to help us determine, are we giving steady compressions? Am I doing good chest recoil? Am I getting tired? These are things to consider that we'll look at whenever you're looking at that waveform. Another point of capnography during CPR is ROSC. The moment you hit ROSC, you're going to see a drastic rise in that waveform because of the ventilation and gas exchange. You can't have ventilation with a big jump unless there's perfusion, right? So I always let people know if you ever see a large change during CPR in your CO2 waveform, it's probably ROSC. I would recommend checking for a pulse. The next component we'll talk is about our technology. Our technology is not just in the filter line, but it's also inside the module itself. The way it works is you collect the breath at the ET tube. The breath is then pulled by a vacuum into the module, where then it is analyzed and we give you a respiratory rate and a CO2 reading. Our filter lines have 0.2 micron filter at the very end. That's to protect your module from getting wet, keeping debris out of it. However, eventually what will happen is this this filter line will get water, it will get moisture, and on your main monitor, what you can possibly see is the word occlusion. What that means is this filter is occluded just because of saturation of moisture. Not a problem. You unplug it, you throw it away, you get a brand new one. Our tech is plug and play. You should not have to calibrate it or zero it or anything. We add a wick system on there as well. This wick system, the point of it is to help pull that water off. We're trying to avoid burning out this filter quickly. So I add this system. It's going to pull as much water off as possible, just to help you save this filter. Another point that I always bring up to people to help you troubleshoot this and help your filter last longer, if you're giving a nebulizer, if you're lavage suctioning, I recommend you unplug our filter from the Mindray module. This will then turn the motor off. It will not be pulling our breath anymore. What ends up happening is that water from the nebulizer will suck into the filter really quickly, and it's going to clog your filter faster than normal. Do not remove the main part of the sampling port from the circuit. We don't want to break the circuit. We want to keep that circuit solid. Removing the port from the module is a better bet. It allows that motor to shut off, and it keeps you at that circuit closed. Whenever you have the main point that you're sampling from, try and keep it upright. I know you'll have to rotate your patient from side to side. You're trying to keep the sampling port upright. That way it keeps that line clear. If this does get saturated, and it will because of humidity, just go ahead and throw it away and grab a brand new one. It'll save your module, it'll save your tech.